Hey everyone, welcome back to another hardware news recap for the week. In this one, another busy news cycle. So ASUS, we've confirmed, does in fact have Gundam-themed components coming to market. We'll be talking about those this week. DigiTimes says that NVIDIA will be allegedly moving over to TSMC, either in addition to or instead of its existing Samsung 8nm process for Ampere. Innosilicon and SMIC taping out some 7nm class chips, EVGA with a beta BIOS for increased power limits on some cards, and then a couple of other stories like Arctic updates to the Liquid Freezer 2 line. Before that, this video is brought to you by Thermaltake's Core P3 case. The Core P3 is one of the most unique cases on the market. It can serve as an open-air standing chassis, a test bench in vertical or horizontal orientation, or as a wall-mounted showcase PC. The Core P3 now comes with a 5mm thick tempered glass panel for its side, but keeps the front, top, and back open for air. You can learn more at the link in the description below. So the first news story is from DigiTimes. DigiTimes reported, predicated on industry sources, that it claims NVIDIA may be moving to TSMC in 2021, again, either in addition to or instead of Samsung, so that it can get some 7nm Ampere chips out there as well. And that's a ways off for right now, but TSMC currently has a high supply of 7nm. It's serving a lot of top-tier customers, so it's got AMD, obviously, but also Apple as one of its customers. Recently, Huawei has been sort of in and out of being a potential customer of TSMC based on the trade disputes between the involved parties. And overall, for NVIDIA, as DigiTimes reports, this would be apparently an attempt at diversification of supply and risk management by getting an additional partner in the mix. NVIDIA has done this before. It ran, for example, 16nm and 14nm parts simultaneously previously. So this wouldn't be the first time they've done it, but it's possible they use 8nm for some and 7 for others, depending on what the GPU is and how much supply they need of each one. TSMC, for its part, needs to keep its 7nm supply saturated as it's working to transition eventually towards newer nodes. It's got 7nm plus, it has 5nm in the works, it's been studying 3nm. So through at least 2021, TSMC is looking to fill its books for 7nm, and NVIDIA would be a large partner that would help it to achieve that goal. As far as NVIDIA in this, NVIDIA and TSMC have a long-standing relationship, so it makes sense that they'd be able to potentially quickly turn around an agreement relative to other options. And it may be that this is related to supply side, not necessarily shortages, but inability to meet the current demand for the Ampere GPUs. And on that note too, from what we've seen numbers-wise, it still looks like Ampere did actually have pretty good supply. Related especially to the Pascal launch, the 10 series, which was a very popular launch, and especially to the 20 series launch. So its demand is still super high, availability is still low, and the retailers we've spoken with thus far are still just globally struggling to meet the demand, as you saw in our news video a couple days ago, where ProShop posted some of its own numbers on this, and scan.co.uk has posted similar numbers on its own supply and the outstanding orders from customers that it's trying to fill. If you're interested in more of that story, Scan has its own page up on that. All right, memory market, still in oversupply right now. We've been covering this for a little bit, but in a previous news video from about probably 2 months ago, we were saying that around October, November, you should be expecting some price changes in the flash market, and it looks like that's still on target. So according to a report from TrendForce, the memory market, that'd be NAND and DRAM, is still in a persistent state of oversupply as we head into fourth quarter. While TrendForce notes that smartphone manufacturers are moving to hoard memory and capture market share that Huawei has forfeited, it's not enough to offset the waning demand from the server market. Barring a sudden upswing, the memory market looks to remain flat throughout fourth quarter of 2020 and could see a 10% decrease in average memory ASP quarter over quarter, average selling price. TrendForce is reporting that in regards to DRAM, mobile and server DRAM are seeing the most fluctuation at the moment, with mobile DRAM seeing an ASP reduction by as much as 5% quarter over quarter, while server stands to drop even further by as much as 15%. As for NAND, TrendForce notes that customers are currently sitting on high levels of inventory and that NAND wafer production is continuing to rise, both of which seem to be exacerbating the oversupply issue. There's also a marked decrease in demand from server vendors in regards to SSDs, and the overall NAND flash ASP could drop by as much as 10% according to the report by end of fourth quarter 2020. Looking ahead to first quarter of 21, it looks like the DRAM market could be headed to a bit of a rebound, partly thanks to seasonal supply and demand shifts as vendors are looking to restock. Meanwhile, for the NAND market, that's expected to continue to drop at present, with another anticipated 15% decrease in ASP through the first quarter of 2021. Up next, EVGA released a beta RTX 3080 BIOS for its FTW3 cards. This BIOS is increasing the power limit to 450 watts from 400 watts previously. This additional 50 watts will help you a bit in frequency endeavors, pushing the clocks a little bit higher. It will remove part of the power bind. You're still going to be power bound, and you'll eventually hit other binds too, mostly thermal if you're on air. It's definitely thermal is what you'll hit first. Power, thermal, and then voltage after that. But you'd have to get past thermal first for that to matter. So 450 watts might help a little bit with removing some of the bottlenecking when overclocking the higher end FTW3 3080 cards for the Ultra specifically. And it does shift EVGA's recommendation to an 850 watt power supply as a baseline to support the increased power consumption. Recapping our own extreme overclocking efforts with the 3080 FTW3, so we ran it stock originally in a stream versus some of the other cards we had in at the time. And in that stream out of box, it was the best performer that we had. And then we later did some extreme overclocking. Actually, Joe Stepanzi joined us for that from Bearded Hardware, and we used liquid nitrogen. It was briefly a world record card with liquid nitrogen. That was with a custom VBIOS that unlocked the card. This one will not push you quite as high as that one would in terms of the power limits, but 50 watts is still a big help. So if you've got the card and you're looking to do some overclocking as a competitive or just for fun thing, then the extra VBIOS bump might help. In terms of running it that way long term for the life of the card, maybe not necessarily recommended just because it does start to get abusive, and there is a reason that EVGA didn't ship with that VBIOS. So keep that in mind. Next up, Innosilicon and SMIC taping out a homegrown 7nm class chip. This is a Chinese ASIC IP and design firm, Innosilicon, that has completed the tape out for the first chip using China's own Semiconductor Manufacturing International Corporation's, or SMIC, N+1 process node. SMIC's N+1 process is currently thought of as something of a premature 7nm FinFET manufacturing process, and while it may be considered 7nm class, it's not ready for volume production, and we don't have any indication as to how it would compare to TSMC's pure 7nm nodes, which currently lead the way. As a reminder, whenever you're talking about the process and using phrases like 7nm, 10nm, 14nm, the number isn't the only thing to compare. There's also density, for example. And so back in the day, before everyone started shifting to 7, Intel, when it was still expecting to hit 10 in a reasonable time, was quick to remind everyone that Intel's 10nm would be comparable to everyone else's 7nm, which is true. But at the same time, obviously, it didn't really make it to desktop market in the expected time frame. But that point still stands. Obviously, when you're on 14, everyone's on 7, the point is irrelevant. But the point stands that you can't just linearly compare the number before nanometer, one to the next, to know which is better. But it's still a form of 7nm. So SMIC's N+1 process and Innosilicon's successful tape-out mark a significant milestone for China and its march towards domestic semiconductor independence, which it's been pushing for a while now. SMIC's N+1 process is the latest in the company's roadmap, following its 14nm and 12nm process nodes. Currently, SMIC's N+1 and N+2 nodes are non-EUV, making use of DUV lithography instead. While it seems SMIC can still purchase and maintain DUV equipment from ASML, which is one of the largest equipment suppliers for silicon fabrication facilities. It's unclear presently if it will be able to get a hold of ASML's TwinScan NXE EUV systems due to being on the US Entity List. ASML is currently the only provider of EUV lithography equipment, and if SMIC hopes to advance its process nodes to a point of competition with TSMC and Samsung, it will need access to ASML's latest technology. Next up, some supercomputer news. We've got a good mix of things this week. We'll have some more computer hardware towards the end of this news video. So JAMSTEC's new Earth simulator and supercomputer made the news in the past couple days. This is Japan's Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, and it's set to upgrade its Earth simulator supercomputer, which has existed since the early 2000s and is aimed at researching environmental changes and natural disasters. So it's basically SimCity. And it's been running SimCity 2000 since it was created. Not many people know that, but you heard that here first. So to date, Earth Simulator has spanned across 3 iterations. Earth Simulator 3 was brought online in 2017. That's one of the most recent changes or updates. The presumed Earth Simulator 4, the name not official yet, is slated to come online in March 2021 and will be delivered by NEC. The next Earth Simulator supercomputer will be built on NEC's latest SX Aurora Tsubasa platform, specifically the SX Aurora Tsubasa B401-8. This is a vector supercomputer rack, and NEC's SX Aurora architecture is based around a vector processor, not a scalar processor, and NEC builds them as a PCIe card, which it then calls vector engine cards. Each VE card comes with 8 or 10 cores, depending on the VE card type, and the B401-8 can host up to 8 VE cards. However, B401-8 is unique in that it offers a hybrid computing model consisting of a vector host server that powers the vector engine. The vector host server will use AMD EPYC CPUs, and while NEC doesn't specify which models it will support, we're assuming it'll be EPYC Milan, based on Zen 3. The B401-8 also makes use of NVIDIA Mellanox InfiniBand switches and will support NVIDIA's A100 GPU accelerators. This is all expected to be brought online in 2021, and when it is brought online, the next Earth simulator is expected to offer around 19.5 petaflops of peak compute, which would be around 15 times more powerful than the current Earth simulator version 3. And that one provides 1.3 petaflops of peak compute. However, there's no word currently on if it can run Flight Simulator 2020 at 4K. When we reviewed the Yeston RX 580 CutePet card and the CutePet PC case, we remarked that the main reason they were so interesting was simply for the avoidance of standard design approaches. Video cards and cases don't have to be cat-themed to be unique and interesting, although that is better. But anything other than standard black and red components that are gamer-targeted does get the interest of reviewers who've been reviewing black and red gamer components for a long time now. So ASUS is trying to break into more of the licensed or branded market. Previously, ASUS did this with a video card that had some Assassin's Creed iconography on it. That was years and years ago at this point. But now, ASUS is working on licensing for Gundam branded sets of hardware. And we reached out to ASUS. Originally, this was rumor status. It was leaked online via Twitter originally and kind of spun around the rumor mill. We reached out to ASUS. The company did confirm that it is working on Gundam-themed components, so it's not just a rumor. Although, honestly, it was one that we were a little bit less willing to believe than normally, just because the amount of branding on the amount of components seemed uncommon. But for the immediate future, it looks like these are going to be Asia-Pacific region limited, potentially Japan only, and no official word yet on if ASUS is going to be able to bring the licensing over to the Americas and Europe and other regions. Now, in those leaked images, which again ASUS confirmed with us, the company is working on Gundam-branded Extreme Series motherboards. It's working on Gundam-branded routers. It is also working on all the peripherals, keyboard, mouse, headset, closed-loop liquid cooler, or an AIO if you prefer, a case, and a couple of other things too. So there are 2 sets of products, and fortunately at Gamers Nexus we have not 1 but 2 local experts on Gundams, and I've been told that the 2 sets of products are for Char's Zaku, red and black on the right side of the image, and also the white, yellow, and blue RX 78-2. Now, ironically, I did just complain about red and black gamer-themed components, which half of these are, but at least they are licensing something a little bit more interesting than random genericized signal traces that are red and black. In the leaked images, that's what ASUS is working on right now. This is exactly the type of branding that we were asking for when we did our Cute Pet component reviews, basically saying, give us something other than a brick for a video card with some fans on it. Something interesting. The Helios case in these images certainly looks much more interesting and potentially forgivable on its shortcomings in this version than its original launch version. And finally, 2 news items on Arctic, the cooling company. So Arctic informed Gamers Nexus of an update to its Liquid Freezer 2 coolers. We previously reviewed the Liquid Freezer 2 line fairly positively, primarily hinged upon the thermal performance being among the chart toppers, and later EK's AIO was added to that list of chart toppers presently in our AM4 benchmarks. But we spent a good deal of the review of the Arctic coolers criticizing the mounting solution specifically for AM4. The Intel solution was much better and more standard, but the AM4 one required 3 hands and a lot of patience to get installed. From what we understand right now, this is still kind of being developed. We haven't received one of these kits yet. But from what we've been supplied by Arctic and understand, it looks like the company is trying to fix this problem, and it looks like the updated mounting bracket will install to the motherboard first with standoffs and screws, as is somewhat standard in most coolers, and then you'll mount the cooler on top of that and screw it in, as opposed to mounting the rails to the pump block housing and then lining that up and holding the backplate in place and using a screwdriver to try and hold the cooler in place with maybe your elbow while you screw in the screw and holding the backplate all at once. So this should, in theory, solve that problem. We're still getting final details on it. But Arctic also says that it may potentially help better center the cold plate on the IHS, which it says might help with hotspot cooling. Whether or not that'll actually show up in testing, we'll see. If it's actually meaningful, we'll post something on it. And if it's not really meaningful, then we'll probably just ignore it. But if you see a change in the mounting hardware in what you receive versus what we originally reviewed, now you know why. It sounds like the things we complained about should be getting fixed, which is a good thing. And Arctic actually, on our initial review of the 280 Liquid Freezer 2, one of Arctic's team members posted a comment acknowledging the, we'll call them frustrations with the original bracket, and saying that they wanted to work on improving them. So this may be the realization of those hoped improvements that Arctic mentioned previously. As for if you can, how to know if you're going to get that newer solution versus the older one, it's going to be a first in, first out type of situation where all of the coolers that are in stock now will ship first, and then the updated ones will ship after that. So it's just a matter of when the inventory clears in the different regions and the warehouses that your order ships from. This upgrade will also provide socket support for AM3 and AM3 Plus, if that matters to you. Might be interesting to a few people, but otherwise those are the only real changes about this one. And finally, the Arctic Freezer 50 launches officially. This is on our shelf of coolers to be reviewed now. So speaking of Arctic, we have their Freezer 50 air cooler to review shortly. The cooler is a €60 dual fan, dual tower air cooler. The cooler is mostly enshrouded in plastic, but it promises more guided airflow by nature of the enclosed design. The cooler combines a 120 and a 140 mil fan, which it says shrinks the overall installation height and improves RAM clearance. Arctic lists the cooler in its specs table as being 166 millimeters tall, which is still in excess of what many of the smaller ATX cases will fit, but it's not overbearing. Socket compatibility is listed as LGA 1200, 11.5X, 2066, 2011-3, and AM4. RAM clearance is listed as 37.5 millimeters for RAM height, and there's a 6-year warranty listed for the unit. This is one that we have going through the reviews process, and the Gallick will go up first, and then probably the new Be Quiet cooler, and then we'll start looking at the Arctic Freezer 50 after that, most likely. So that's the plan for the next couple cooler reviews, and that's it for this one. Thank you for watching. As always, you can go to store.gamersnexus.net to help us out directly by picking up things like our toolkits, mod mats, which both are on back order right now, or the PC component shirts, which are in stock. And you can go to patreon.com/gamersnexus, subscribe for more. We'll see you all next time.